Hi, this is Kate, Teen Services Librarian at the Brighton District Library, and today I'm going to show you how to make this geometric heart watercolor image. So for our supplies, we're going to need watercolor paper, some watercolors, water obviously. I also have some salt, and I've got a template, and I've also got some graphite transfer paper. Some of these supplies are optional. But to start with, I am going to decide on my template, kind of get an idea of where I want things. Then I'm going to grab my graphite transfer paper and I'm going to turn it with the darker side face down on top of my watercolor paper. I then am going to decide where to place my image. So I'm going to trace over the Happy Valentine's Day. I want it at the bottom of my image. And you can use a pen or any pencil to trace over this, and it's going to transfer onto your paper. So you can go ahead and do that to start with. Once I have my Happy Valentine's Day traced over, I'm going to do the same thing with one of my hearts. I picked the biggest one on this template to use. And I'm just going to trace over the geometric shape. I'm doing this really quickly, but you can take your time if you want to get the straighter lines. But I am going to utilize a ruler when I go to do the marker. So you can do that as well if you do not have a steady hand, because I definitely do not. So I'm just going to really quickly trace this just to get an idea of where I want all of my lines. All right, now that I have my graphite transfer done, I'm going to go in with a Sharpie and I'm just going to trace over these lines. Now, I don't have the best handwriting and I'm a little bit shaky, so that Happy Valentine's Day tracing was really important for me to do. I'm also going to suggest you use a ruler for the next part, and if you happen to have a fine point Sharpie, I recommend that over the thicker Sharpie just because you can get a nicer thin line. So I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm going to follow the guidelines that I traced over, and just go ahead and get the Sharpie over all of my lines. Now what this does is the Sharpie is waterproof, so once the Sharpie dries, I can go over it with watercolor and the lines will stay, and you'll get to have that cool geometric pattern while still getting the cool watercolor effect. So I skipped ahead a bit just to finish up, go ahead and putting Sharpie over all of my lines. And after you're done, just let your Sharpie sit for a minute, walk away, go get something to drink. Just let it dry before you move on to the next step. After my inks are dry, I'm going to grab my watercolor, and I already mixed some up here, and I'm just going to lay some water down into one of my geometric shapes, and then I'm going to pick a color and I'm going to go in with that color just on there, and I'm going to let the water do the work. I'm then going to wipe off my brush and I'm going to pick another shape and to do another color. Now I'm trying to get the same color in a couple of different squares, but I don't want them right next to each other. And I'm going to do all of my red first, so all of the same color, and just kind of lay it out. So you can go ahead and just start filling in the shapes with the color of your choice first. And if you go into another line, it's okay if there's the same color right next to the one. After I get my one color all set and it's nice cold, I'm going to get some salt. You can use sea salt or just regular table salt. And while that paint is still wet, I'm going to sprinkle some salt over this. It gives a really cool reaction when the paint dries, and it'll give you kind of this speckled splatter effect. I don't really know how to describe it. But yeah, you'll just let it sit there and dry. And then once your paint has dried, you can wipe off the salt to get this cool kind of pattern into your paint. And then I'm going to move on and I'm going to use the purple color to do the other geometric shapes. I'm going to repeat the same process that I did with the red. And the salt option is completely optional. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it just gives a kind of a neat effect. You also have the opportunity to kind of play with mixing colors. So in this, I started out with the purple straight from the pan, but eventually I start going and grabbing some of the blue and putting in with my purple, or mixing the red with the blue. You can also get a variety of how dark or deep you want your colors by adding more or less water. So go ahead and play around with it and just go and start filling in your little different geometric shapes, and to make this your own. If you want to use green, you can. If you want to use yellow, blue, pink, purple, whatever you want, it is your Valentine's Day heart. Then once again, at the end, I'm going to sprinkle it with some salt, and then I'm going to leave it to dry for a while. After it dries, I'm just going to tap off the salt. I'm also might have to brush it. Mine was kind of sticking to my paper a little bit, so it took a little bit to come off. Also want to make sure that your paint is fully dry. I don't know if you notice in mine, there's a little smear on mine at the top. That's because when I did the red, I was too impatient. But yeah, so just once you take the salt off, out there, you're all set, and you get this cool Valentine's Day heart. And then you could do a background paint if you want, but there it is. And that's all there is to it.